Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Future Talks. I'm your host, Michael Matsuda, Superintendent of the Anaheim Union High School District. And as our 8,000 plus podcast listeners know, this is all about the future of education. And we've been very fortunate today to have an international leader in education, Jennifer Adams, who is just completed an 8-year term as the Director of Education for the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board in Ontario, Canada, serving over 73,000 students across 150 elementary and secondary schools. Jennifer, welcome to our show.
Hi, Mike. It's great to be here.
So on top of that, Jennifer, you are former superintendent of curriculum, an elementary school principal, and a French teacher. And you also serve as the chair of the advisory committee for the OECD, and we'll hear more about that study on social and emotional skills. And you're also part of the Global Alliance for Social Emotional Learning and Life Skills. And she is the founder and CEO of Educating Leaders, a consulting firm specializing in education, future skills, and leadership and talent development. So many hats that you wear, Jennifer. I was really drawn to your involvement on the big stage, this Global Alliance for Social Emotional. Why do you think that that is such an important issue right now as we, in the age of AI?
So it's interesting that you asked that, Mike, and I think it actually started earlier than that. And I know that you've been an educational leader in California for a long time. And how I got connected to social emotional learning was when I was superintendent in the district that I was coming from, and we were looking at all of our secondary schools, all of our high schools, and we were talking about what are the skills and competencies and values that every child, every student leaving our system should have. And when we started to do a search, we had a big committee that came together that was business partners and post-secondary people and parents, and we got a big group together. We started looking at the research at the time, and that was over 10 years ago. And many of the skills and the competencies, when we looked at the research, were around social emotional learning, even though it was kind of in the early days of it being called that. And they were talking about things like, you know, the ability to know yourself, the ability to interact with others. And so that's where it kind of took off. And that's how my involvement with the OECD happened. And fast forward, and I'm sure we're going to be going back and talking a little bit about the steps in between, but now it's more important than ever. And some of the work that I'm doing now, or facilitating conversations around, is that whole idea of what does future skills look like? I love that your podcast is called Future Talks, right? What does the future look like? And what we're seeing is that there's more and more of a need of a combination of human skills in this new AI world. That the AI world will do a lot of things, but they can't replace the human skills. And so how do we in education systems, whether it's preschool or K-12 or in post-secondary, how do we make sure that all of us are helping our students develop those skills in that new context?
You know, I know your colleague Michael Fullen talks about the common North Star. How would you identify that North Star in light of what you just said about this whole child and supporting humanity for education? How would you define that?
I think as a superintendent in a large district, and my colleagues would tease me about it, I was known as the teaching and learning superintendent. It was really important to me that we really thought critically about how are we engaging students from the vast diversity of students that we all have in our systems? How do we engage them? How do we think about the pedagogical practices, the experiences that they should be having, so that they're walking out the door feeling like they're ready to thrive in their personal lives, in follow-up education in their careers, contributing to their communities. So my North Star is that idea of teaching and learning, and it has to be, our systems have to be transforming constantly to make adjustments for the context of learning that's happening now.
How do you frame this change? Because there's so much sort of trepidation about even the word social emotional. How do you frame it in a way that you get parents and all the other stakeholders out there to agree that this is important and this is a way that we need to go forward?
That's a great question. And in some ways, I think we've done a little bit of a disservice by calling it social emotional learning, because there's a natural backlash to that concept. And so really, I think human skills is a great way of describing it. I think future skills, transformational skills, I think we have to use language that really matches the needs of our communities. One of the things that I found super helpful, Mike, when we started to have these conversations at my local level, was to bring in business leaders. And business leaders started to talk about the kinds of skills that they were looking for when they were hiring into their organizations, as well as their talent development. And what I found really interesting is that it's not just the job of PK or TK to 12 or even secondary, that business leaders know that for their employees to be thriving, they have to be helping them to nurture the development of those human skills. So that was a piece, bringing in the business leaders. When parents hear that that's what employers are looking for, they're much more confident and much more encouraging of saying, okay, if that's what they're looking for, how do we support as parents? How do we support as a community? And how can schools help our children develop those skills?
So that brings me to the next question about standardized tests. I don't know how big that is in Canada, but still it is a major driver in the United States. And you had mentioned the business community being potentially an ally to move into this beyond standardized testing, right? We need to really focus on the transferable skills, the power skills, that sort of thing. How in Canada does that play out?
So, I think in general, there's a stronger, a greater emphasis on testing in the States than there is in Canada. The other thing that I think that has helped to move the needle on social emotional skills, or these human skills, is the fact that the OECD, a decade ago, came out with the idea that there was pushback on the PISA assessments, and teachers and teacher unions, rightfully so, would say, it's not, we do far more with students than helping them learn how to have math skills and competencies and reading and science. We do more than that. And so, interestingly, the OECD developed an international survey on social emotional skills. And I think that added great credibility, because suddenly it's looking at another aspect of what do we do in schools and what are the skills that kids will need to have to be able to thrive in later life. And the studies that they've been doing, I was involved in the first cycle. Ottawa, my school district, as well as the other school districts in the area, took part as the representative of Canada across 12 or 13 other countries. And I think that has helped to legitimize this idea that, yes, there's social emotional skills that need to happen in addition to academic. And I think that's something that we haven't done a good job of, even with our teaching population and with our parents, to really bring this idea that it's not an either or, it's a both and. Kids need to have those academic skills. That's a given. They also need to have those human skills that help them to be in a situation where they can even approach learning when they have a sense of well-being that's partly driven by those social emotional skills.
So in the United States, this whole AI world seems and feels like the Wild West, that it's just it's crazy in terms of how much money is being pushed out. How is Canada approaching this in terms of policies and both at the federal and the local level to protect the interest of young people as we go forward with AI?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I can be a true spokesperson for everything that's happening in Canada, but I can tell you that we have the same concerns. And, I think all of us are seeing in a world that's moving very quickly and the technology that is flying. I think there's more of a recognition, certainly, that there are some parameters that are going to need to be put into shape, into place to protect our students, to protect our children, to protect our societies. And, some of those conversations are happening at the policy level, at the federal level. Others are happening, municipalities and in school systems, et cetera. And, we do a lot of talk within our school systems. Many of the systems have put in policies around the use of AI in instruction, in assessment, et cetera, and really trying to make sure that everybody knows what the parameters are and that we're not walking away from some of the benefits of what's happening with AI, but that there's some parameters to make sure that we can be protecting our children.
So have you been looking at this, try to differentiate between AI literacy and AI fluency, AI literacy being sort of the grounding of and understanding the ethical implications and how it works, while fluency is more the practical side, like beyond that. Yes, we need that basic grounding, but using AI tools to solve problems and make decisions and potentially drive innovation in terms of that problem solving. I'm wondering if you, in your world or in Canada, if they're talking about that and how that might impact the social, emotional, and the development of the brain, adolescent brain.
So, I think of some of the ethical questions is that foundational piece, right? And I think in general, we have to be thinking of those foundational pieces. We have to be thinking about them with respect to well-being and with learning, right? So what are the foundational parameters that we would need to put in place to make sure that these tools are being used for good purposes? And then, of course, there's the application of it that I think you were talking about, that fluency, right? So then how precisely, once we say these are the foundational pieces with the idea of promoting well-being, promoting learning, promoting safety, once those pieces are put in place, then how are practitioners going to be using them? And those are conversations that are very new, and they're happening in schools, they're happening in classrooms, they're happening in boardrooms. They're relatively new, and some of our jurisdictions are starting to put more finite policies around that AI fluency piece. When are people allowed to use them? How will they be using them? And there's a whole range that we're starting to see.
In the States, we are there's all these statistics coming out about one of the fastest growing areas of underemployment is with recent college grads, 25 to 30% as we're speaking. So the big question was, what is the implication for K-16, right? And I think it is related to moving beyond the literacy to the fluency in terms of how we expose kids in a very strategic way to move so that they can take more ownership of these tools. Are there conversations like that going on in Canada?
So I'll give you one example, Mike. One of the roles that I play, I'm the chair of the board of governors for the University of Ottawa. University of Ottawa is a U16 research university with about 50,000 students in it. So it's a big university. And we just had a board meeting the other day, and one of the conversations is exactly like what you were talking about the diminishing number of startup jobs. So entry-level jobs, when students are coming out of a post-secondary experience, normally, of course, they were all entering into entry-level positions. And because so many of the tasks that are typically done in those entry-level jobs are literally disappearing. And so if that's the case, if those entry-level tasks are disappearing, what are the tasks that students coming right out of K to 12, right out of secondary school, what are they going to be doing? And that's when it comes to that focus on human skills. So yes, they will need to have, literacy skills and numeracy skills. They'll need to have an understanding of how technology works. But boy, they better have problem-solving skills. They better have critical thinking. They better be able to communicate well. They better be able to relate to others. They better be able to have a clear sense of who they are and be able to goal set, etc. Those are the kinds of things that we need to be building in. And I think it gets back to the point that I was making earlier. It's about teaching and learning. What kinds of experiences are we going to give our kids that are in our care, both in our confines of our classroom and outside of our classroom? What kind of experiential learning will they do? Who will be their mentors? It's that human experience that we really need to be, I'm going to say, fast tracking, so that when they're going out into the world of work, whether it's directly from our high schools or directly from our post-secondary institutions, they're going to be tasked with doing decision-making, problem-solving, critical thinking, contributions that are at a higher level than what they were even 5 years ago. Those entry-level tasks are gone. So I think, if there has ever been a need for transformation of education, I think there's lots of places that have started that. And I'm not one of these people that say, no, we don't do that. I think there's been a huge movement towards really good instructional practice and really a broader sense of what does teaching and learning look like. And I think this justifies it and makes it that much more urgent. We can't wait.
So what does this mean for professional development, professional learning? Because arguably in the States, we have a whole generation of teachers who are brought in to raise test scores, right? Not really focused, especially outside of primary. Primary, there's a lot of focus on the whole child, but I think that we kind of lost our way in secondary. So what does this mean? We can't wait. There's a sense of urgency you just outlined. What would be some examples of what we need to do in terms of training up these next generation of teachers?
So when I look back to my experience as superintendent in the Ottawa district, and when we came out with this idea of exit outcomes, these are the exit outcomes based on community collaboration and consultation. This is what people want them to have. The instant reaction, and rightfully so, from our principals and our teachers is, wait a second, if we're supposed to be helping students develop those skills, what are we going to need as adults? What opportunities do we need so that we can continue to develop those skills? So I think there's a piece, there's something that almost makes it more inclusive, in the sense that it's no longer what are the kids going to be learning and what are the adults going to be learning. We have to think of it more holistically. What do we all need? What kinds of learning situations do we all need to be in so that we can help? The end goal, obviously, is to impact those students. So what does professional learning look like? I think it's making sure that teachers are in situations where, instead of being talked at, they're actually experiencing the learning. That it's an adult model where they have choices, just like we would want to have choices for students in the classroom. That it's experiential. They get to hear about some theory and some underpinnings and some academics that are helping show what are those best practices, and then actually having an opportunity to try them out. Mentorship, interaction, human interaction. How do we have more time for teachers and principals to build that collective efficacy? One of my colleagues, who is a great friend and colleague, she talks about collective efficacy being the only thing that trumps zip code. So if we are going to be giving kids an opportunity to beat where they have come from, where if they have been in very tough socioeconomic levels, etc., collective efficacy is what's going to trump that. So how do we give adults that are surrounding our students the opportunity to come together, to row in the same direction, and to really have coherent systems? I mean, you talked about Michael Fullen, and I know that you've worked really closely with him. It's a systems thinking approach. How do we decide what those goals are, what the vision is, and make sure that every student in our care has that experience based on the experiences that we're providing for our adults?
You know, there's a growing movement in the United States with these micro schools that are being touted as, you know, just personalized learning, a place where your kid can be really feeling connected and personalized. There's one little caveat though, there's no teachers. It's all through AI, right? What's your response to something like that? You know, and there's a growing number of them, and I think the jury's still out on this type of teaching and learning.
So I'll make a couple of comments that might not be popular. So the first one is that different students need different things. And while I have no doubt that there are some students that could function very well within a non-adult guidance scenario, I don't doubt that those students will be able to develop skills that will be very useful in the future. What I would wonder about is, but are we developing the whole student or helping that student develop all of them as opposed to just certain skills? Because, you know, how do we make sure, if it's an AI environment, how do we make sure that they're actually interacting with each other as students, with adults, with community, etc.? So I would have to see that it doesn't, to me, it's fine if it's AI infused, but I would never want to take the human element out of teaching and learning, because, for obvious reasons.
Yeah, we're definitely at a critical juncture with all of this happening all at once, right?
Yeah.
So are there any other things that you'd want to share with our audience in the final moments that we have?
I think it's a really important time. And, you know, when we look at what's happening in the world, what's happening in our individual countries, everything from economic turmoil to, you know, conflicts amongst groups, very binary in lots of ways of looking at the world, and hotspots around the world without even getting into climate change and everything. We need kids coming out with well-rounded experiences so that they can be well-rounded, contributing human beings and help to bring this world to a better place than what it is right now. And they're counting on us to do that. When I say us, it's not just people within the school system. It has to be a whole community of learning. And so how do we, in the education field, how do we bring in healthcare? How do we bring in community? How do we bring in society so that we're actually having a collective look on what our learners are going out to, and how they'll be ready to help us out in the future?
Wow, that's awesome. You just shared your North Star for all of us, Jennifer, and on behalf of all of our listeners, thank you so much.
So nice being with you today, Mike. Look forward to connecting again.